Big one is in the papers. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they come in. So in the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with The Observer's chief leader writer Sonia Sodha and the editor of City AM, Christian May. Great to see you both. Hello to you. So to the front pages then, let's take a look, shall we? And starting with the Times, and that Labour pledge about its plans for BT is the lead for that paper. Labour vows billions to nationalise broadband is its headline. The Telegraph reports on Nigel Farage's allegation made live on Sky News that the Conservatives offered Brexit Party candidates jobs in Downing Street in exchange for standing aside in the election, a claim that Number 10 denies. The Daily Mail carries what it says is criticism from some of Labour's own candidates over Jeremy Corbyn's stances on Brexit and anti-Semitism. Tax cuts proposed by Boris Johnson are the top story for The Express. The Metro reports on the release of new figures which show that A&E waiting times are at their highest for 15 years. Same story for the Mirror. Betrayed, their headline, NHS implodes under the Tories. The Guardian says local councils are insisting on the government to provide massive funding increases for flood prevention in the wake of the damage affecting much of the north of England. According to the Financial Times, digital advertising firms are upset with Google's promise to more closely guard its users' personal data. And The Star has a story concerning the former EastEnders actor Sean Williamson. So Sonia Sodha, Christian May are here. Let's start with the Times, shall we? Labour vowing billions to nationalise broadband, a capital spend of nearly 16 billion, we hear, saving people £30.30 a month. Will this be a good offering? Does it challenge Boris Johnson's pledge to get broadband to people's homes? What do you make of it so far?
Well, it's a remarkable proposition, if you think about it. The assault on BT, one of the largest companies in the country, to break it up, to threaten, as with all the other industries they said they'll come for, not to pay market price compensation to the shareholders, who are not the fat cats that Jeremy Corbyn likes to talk about. They will be people's pension funds in particular. If you think that your broadband provider now is a bit slow and clunky, you wait until it's run by a Whitehall department. How long do people have to wait to get a phone line installed? The last time British Telecom was owned by the taxpayer? I think this is an extraordinary proposition, and I think the details will start to be pulled apart over the next few days in much the same way that the details around all their other nationalisation plans began to crumble when you look at the costs and the lawsuits that will follow.
Well, I think it's certainly a very big and a very radical announcement. I think, to be fair to Labour, though, we do have to sort of evaluate it on the terms of which they've put forward. And to your point, Christian, about whether shareholders get paid market value or not, Labour's been very clear in what they've put out, that no pensioners, no people with funds in BT are going to lose out. And it's Parliament who sets the price, and Parliament will look at the market value and how it's valued at the point of nationalisation.
Depends on the shape of Parliament, though, doesn't it?
It does rather, but I don't think Labour are going to be looking to get a fast one on people who've got pensions, and they've been very clear on that in the press release. I think, if we take a step, so on the face of it, this is a very big radical announcement. If you take a step back, though, and look at what's been going on with our broadband in the last 20 years, the point that Labour makes is that we are incredibly backwards, actually, in this country when it comes to broadband. Only 8 to 10% of UK homes and businesses have direct connection to full fibre broadband. If you look at countries like Japan, South Korea, it's in the high 90s, 97, 98%. Even a country like Spain, which is very close to us, it is very, very high. And that costs our economy a significant amount of money. The fact that, if you're a business somewhere like Devon, it's impossible to get really basic, good, reliable broadband if you're trying to sell over the internet, let alone this really fast fibre stuff that
but what is it the States?
South Korea or Japan can have. So the current system is not working. I agree, there are questions to be asked. Can the state run it better than the private sector? The private sector is doing a pretty dreadful job of it at the moment. Perhaps the state will come in and do an even worse job, or perhaps the state will come in and with the NHS, compared to other non-nationalised health systems, the NHS is actually one of the most efficient health systems in the world. So I think there are a lot of questions to be asked about this, but I don't think it can be just dismissed initially, as Christian is doing.
Well, it might be dismissed, if not just by me, it might be dismissed by the electorate. John Curtis today said the chances of Labour securing a majority, which it will need to do this, is precisely zero. So we can come back and check on.
We can check. It's close to zero as it can be. But I mean,
as close to zero as it's possible to be.
Let's have a debate, Christian.
I'm happy to debate it because
the policy rather than how Labour are going to do in the election.
Well, I think the substance of the policy is ridiculous, and I think there is a fundamental philosophical proposition at the heart of every press release from Labour in this campaign, which is private bad, public good. And they can say to people, we'll save you £30 a month by 2030 by putting another 30 billion of your money into another industry. I don't think is necessary.
Christian, do you not think that there's something as ideological in the assumptions about what you're saying, which is just as bad in my view as saying public good, private bad, which is private good, public bad? I actually think we need to take a much more pragmatic view of this. There is some things that the private sector is great at doing. There are some things that the public sector is good at doing. The public sector has failures, the private sector has failures. Let's not be so dogmatic about this, I think. Let's take a step back. It's very clear broadband as it exists at the moment is not working well. I'm willing to give this policy idea the time of day.
It's not just broadband, is it? The suggestion of renationalisation of other infrastructure parts of the UK economy.
Actually, I think
and ultimately, how much will that cost? Does it matter? Is borrowing low enough to sustain? That is the fundamental question about the size of the state.
Yeah, I mean, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has said that if you want to make an argument to borrow £500 billion, it is not intellectually sufficient to say we'll do it because interest rates are low. That is not a sufficient justification for that level of borrowing and investment. And they apply that argument to the Tories as well, who are being reckless, albeit at a smaller scale with their spending commitments. But these sorts of figures, these sorts of commitments, I don't think stand up to scrutiny. And I don't think the scale of that investment and that seizure of private property matches up. Well, it would be a seizure. It would absolutely be a seizure.
Well, it's a forced sale, effectively, isn't it? And whatever price is dictated by the government of the day.
Forced sale, seizure.
I do agree that there are questions about scale here, but I absolutely think that if you think that we've not been investing enough in infrastructure in our economy, which, let's face it, you look at our economy the last kind of 30, 40 years, we have not invested in infrastructure properly. That's why only 8 to 10% of UK homes have access to full fibre broadband.
Do you remember the days of British Rail, though? Because a lot of people voting will not be old enough.
Of course, the state can run things badly. Of course, the state can. But let's face it, the private sector can really mess things up as well. So I'm just saying we should give this proposal the time of day. It's very clear the existing system is not working. We are way, way behind our international competitors when it comes to full fibre broadband.
Well, I'll tell you what we will agree on, which is I suspect this will be a very popular policy, which I suppose puts an onus on those opponents of the policy to argue forcefully, as I have tried to do this evening.
You certainly have done that, Christian, absolutely.
OK, so let's look at our other papers then, shall we? I'm not sure what you're going to be honest with you. The Telegraph front page then, Farage accuses Number 10 of dirty tricks elsewhere in the election, one could say. Forcibly denied by Number 10, in fact. But this is quite an accusation, isn't it?
Yeah, Farage is furious, and I think in part that fury is driven by the fact that he's sort of lost control of his role in this election, having said he was going to field 600 candidates, rowing back, now he's got candidates pulling out, and he's furious that the Tories didn't reciprocate and say that we'll let you have a clean run in a few Labour marginals. And his allegation made on Sky News is that Boris Johnson's officials have been putting on all sorts of pressure and inducements to Brexit Party candidates to stand down. And Number 10 have said absolutely not. So I don't know whether this is an interpretation of certain phone calls or whether this is just Farage reporting what he has heard or been told, but it does go to show that I think how furious Farage is with the way in which he's been thrown out into the cold, with the Tories not having met him halfway.
I think it shows that, but I think we also don't know who to trust in this story, because Number 10 have put out untruths before, that, about Conservative MPs that have categorically been proved to be untrue. And one thing we do know is that there will be a lot of disconcert, behind closed doors in Tory HQ about Farage continuing to stand 300 seats, some of which are really important targets to the Conservative Party. So this may well have been going on behind. It's very clear that the Conservative Party and Boris Johnson has been very clear. We don't want to be telling the public that we're doing some sort of deal with Nigel Farage. But I think it's entirely conceivable, and we We don't know the truth of this. This is Farage alleging one thing, Number 10 saying something else. We don't know the truth of the conversations that have been happening behind closed doors, but I would not be surprised. I think it reflects how marginal this election is going to be. I don't think anyone's expecting either Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson to easily be winning huge majorities. It is a marginal election, and I think I would not be surprised if some of these conversations were going on behind closed doors.
OK, we've got a couple more stories to pack in if we can, very quickly. The Guardian, council's calling for more money to tackle flood devastation. And then we're going to go to the Metro, which is about A&E waiting times and presumably the call for more money there in what is a nationalised, obviously, industry. But let's start with this one, shall we?
This is a huge story this week that I think has, probably taken the Conservatives a bit by surprise. And actually, Boris Johnson has been very much criticised for taking 6 days to go up to visit the floods in Yorkshire and talk to local residents there. This story from The Guardian is that The Guardian's tried to establish the extent of flood damage. And actually, The Guardian, by speaking to lots of local councils, it's established that 1,800 homes and businesses have been badly flooded, which is more than people have been thinking, I think. I think it really shows the scale of these floods. There were also floods in the north of England back in 2015, and if you speak to people from those regions, they still haven't got quite all the money that was promised. So I think there's a concern that money is going to drip in very slowly.
OK, we'll do the A&E waiting times after the break. It feeds into the big state, little state argument, you could argue. Back with that in just a moment. Also, Jeremy Corbyn condemned and by his own people. Back with that in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me this evening, Sonia Sodha and Christian May. We have a statement from BT. I have to say they're not necessarily tackling the political issue with this one. But anyway, BT spokesperson said it should be a top political priority to supercharge the rollout of full fibre broadband and 5G right across the country so we can build the digital economy of the future. Whatever the result of the election, they go on to say, we would encourage the next government to work with all parts of the industry to achieve that. It's a national mission that's bigger than any one company. Presumably suggesting there that they want to stay privatised and work hard to achieve that goal, Christian, do you think?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you saw my reaction to this. BT have obviously got an army of highly paid city advisors who's probably said to them tonight, look, don't wade into this war right now. This may or may not happen. If it does happen, you're going to have years of making your case. So a very restrained statement from them this evening, possibly predicated on the assumption that it's unlikely to pass if there's no majority Labour government.
OK, and what does it mean for other companies that provide broadband as well, of which Sky, is one?
Well, indeed, and you'll be drawing off the Open Reach network. So that's what I was referring to when I said the details of what Labour are proposing, the full technical details, not just what it means, as we discussed, had a bit of a ding-dong over the compensation for shareholders, etc. I know shareholders aren't at the forefront of everybody's mind when there's a grab like this in policy terms, but the technical details about how other broadband providers are going to fit into this proposal are also going to have to be ironed out, to say the least.
OK, we have got not a lot of time and a lot of newspapers. So, first of all, the worst A&E waits ever, always a risk of a winter general election, obviously.
Absolutely. And, the situation's been pretty bad with the NHS the last couple of years. You've had doctors, experts really saying the NHS is creaking at the seams. Last year, we had all non-urgent operations cancelled at the start of January, right up until the end of the month, which is a very grave state of affairs. People waiting for non-urgent but pain-relieving operations, being forced to wait weeks and weeks. And today's figures are really, really bad. They show A&E waiting times are the highest they've ever been. Nearly a quarter of people with cancer are waiting more than 62 days. This is a result of underfunding of the NHS over the last decade. If you look at what the Independent King's Fund says about the NHS's funding settlement, it's the tightest it's ever been over the last decade since its founding.
But problems go beyond that. It's social care, it's an ageing population.
Absolutely. Well,
it is what we do with our old
And it's demand, isn't it? Because, and it's across the board.
But you have to fund your service to sort of keep up with demand. So absolutely,
but it's a sinkhole of cash. I think everybody, understands
we
that.
We spend less on healthcare as a share of GDP, far less than the US, a lot less than some of our European competitors. We're not spending loads of money on healthcare in this country.
We're going to rattle through. Apologies. Daily Mail doing what it does, which is to criticise Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes, it's a nice poster-style front page. They've trawled through candidates standing for Labour, and they've looked back at largely past social media comments when people were being open and honest about what they thought of Jeremy Corbyn. And Jeremy Corbyn is the most unpopular leader of the opposition since pollsters started asking people what they thought about leaders of the opposition, and it just appears that a lot of his own candidates share the views of a lot of members of the public who simply have no time for this man. So if Labour do have some successes in this election, in my opinion, it will be largely in spite of Jeremy Corbyn. And if his own candidates are making this case, then you have to ask, why should the public get on board with Mr. Corbyn?
And we have 10 seconds left, so let's see the final story, which is in the Metro, and miss out the rest, we'll come back to them at 11:30, which is that Meghan presumably will be serving turkey to homeless people, is that right? Question mark, they're not entirely sure.
Actually, when you read the story, it sounds like she might be doing it for Thanksgiving in London.
Okay, there we are. We will see you then. We will see you at 11:30. Thank you.